So welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders their backgrounds, their successes and challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And today I'm really delighted we've got Andy Crossley with us, who's the tech director at the Oakland Group. So Andy, firstly, thank you for coming on board this morning. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and the Oakland Group and how you help people, that would be great.
Yeah, morning, Chris. Thank you for that. It is bright and early this morning. Andy Crossley, tech director at the Oakland Group. As a business, we're actually quite an old startup, is the way we like to think about ourselves. So a company that's 38 years old and only just sort of finding its feet in the world of data. I spent most of our history in sort of operational excellence, process improvement, brown paper and post-it notes, as I like to say. In the last sort of 7 years, I think, roughly, we've sort of shifted big time and embraced sort of data engineering, analytics, that type of thing, primarily because our clients in that world that we worked in, which was mostly large, complex sort of engineering and operational organizations, sort of got moved on from the process challenge and asked us to go, well, yeah, you've improved the process, but can you help us improve the data in the process?
Yes.
The last 7 years have seen us sort of being on quite a reinvention, and we now help organizations primarily on their data journey. So that sort of covers data strategy and governance through to building out the technical side, so data platforms, analytics, engineering, and helping them get more from their data, really.
Oh, well, that's fascinating. So what, I mean, you sort of engineering company, what sort of companies, if you can you name any or just sort of?
Yeah, so our world, I think, rewind back to the 80s, the business was invented or created by our chairman, John Oakland, out of the Leeds University, actually. And that was sort of major organizations across the world, sort of attending the MBA and hearing what he had to say at the time about Lean, Six Sigma, all those sort of trends coming through into manufacturing. So that was everybody from Shell to Coca-Cola to sort of global engineering companies that produced sort of big utilitarian type products as opposed to retail. Through to utilities. So we've never really been sector focused. I think our specialism is helping to solve really complex operational problems, and then remaining quite small through that history. We've always been the team that sort of comes in and, like we say, punch above our weight, sort of gets in there, rolls the sleeves up and starts digging in the trenches with our clients. So that client base hasn't really changed much. We've never sort of gone, like, we're just going after health or we're just going after this, that or the other. We have such a broad range of clients. Has its pros and cons. Sort of trying to pick up the trend or an understanding of a marketplace or a sector when that's not all you do can be tricky. However, what it means is we can bring different lessons from different sectors to different clients, where sometimes they don't necessarily look outside their own industry, which can help them see whether they might be slightly further ahead than they thought or slightly behind than they thought, and how could they leverage what another business in a completely different space might do.
Fascinating. That's really fascinating. But my background was working in control information systems for power generation, but we ended up doing a bunch of data work and data migration work for clients. Yes. So it's almost going the other way around to some extent. So tell us a little bit about your background and the how you got into business and why this particular one.
Yeah, so my career started longer than ago than I care to remember. So 20 odd years ago. Did the uni thing. Did the, I guess, not untypical thing back then of heading into like a graduate program, and worked in a company called Syntegra, which for those of you watching this who are old enough to remember was actually a subsidiary of BT Global Services back in the day. And although they were about 5,000 people strong globally, it was run like a really entrepreneurial business. And my 5 years there, which was I think that was a 2-year graduate program and sort of 3 years on a consulting development program thereafter, really exposed me to they sort of did again, your typical graduate program thing of 6 monthly rotations across the business, which actually taught you quite a lot about the different parts of the business. But I was really lucky to work with a bunch of people that were themselves very entrepreneurial anyway, and then they were sort of given the environment in which to flourish in that. So way back then, I joined a team that at the time was called Mobile Working. So again, those who can cast your mind back, we were one of the first tech teams to start playing around with the original 3 clamshell phones that did video. So what you take for granted now that you can do on your phone, we were at 2 ends of a hotel foyer doing a video call, showing off this technology, but I can still see the guy sort of 100 yards away at the other end of the hotel. And then we went downstairs into the conference center, and it all went off because obviously the signal was never good enough. But what that taught us and what that showed is we were sort of relatively young. We were given some freedom, but it was go and seek out how technology can help a business evolve and do things differently and think out, cliche phrase, but think outside the box. Technology was mainly sort of not monolithic, but typical large ERP systems. The business did a lot on the trading floor, the things that traders use on the floor, and sort of secure systems and things like that. But we, as quite a small team that I joined, were very, go figure stuff out. And that was 5 years of sort of grounding in a proper big business, but also learning to figure it out for yourself. I think for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to run my own business. I don't really know why. I've never been able to put my finger on why that was a thing I had from quite an early age. But I left, it was BT by the time I left 5 years in, and set up my own business, and started trying to redo some of the stuff we were doing at BT to sort of large organizations, which weirdly worked for a couple of years. And then the recession hit. So sort of did a stint in contracting to pay the bills for a period, and then joined a really small tech company at the time that did real-time information systems for airports, transport, and some things for mobile telcos. Did that for a period, but again, that taught me an awful lot of how tech teams work in terms of build and design and build, really. So I ran the consulting practice, and then a really good friend of mine who's at Infinity Works, actually sort of diverted after leaving this company. He ran the tech business, so me and him worked really closely together to make sure that actually the business problem was understood and the solution was fit for purpose. He taught me an awful lot in terms of how you can run a tech team without being a techie as well. And then I left there to move into Oakland, and it was moving into the old Oakland, so the one I described at the beginning that we've come from, really to get back into sort of pure consulting for a bit. That Oakland that I joined wasn't a tech company; it was very much process, large scale sort of operating model design. I came in and started to realise and spot the opportunity to do more on the tech side, and me and Richard, who's now the MD, at the time took it upon ourselves to sort of go and try and figure out what that might look like. And we sort of lent into data quite heavily, and sort of the last 7 years is history. So yeah, that's how we've got to today, really.
Well, what an interesting history you have. I remember Syntegra. I know we did some work with them, and I know we did some work with BT down at the bottom of fairly near Blackfriars. Anyway, there was a big BT offices down there. Anyway, sorry, that's by the by. So I mean, is tech always what you wanted to do when you were growing up, or
I don't know that I don't know that tech was when I was growing up, but certainly when I was at university, I did a business management course, so it's quite broad. And I remember at the time, it was just as things that again now we take for granted. So it's just as things like Amazon were starting to take off. It was just as like terminology started to change to sort of say it felt like the first time we were saying, "Well, Google something," rather than I go on Internet Explorer or even worse, I go on FreeServe or something like that. and then obviously you wait for dial-up back then. But I certainly got really interested and developed a quite a fascination, because one of our courses was around e-commerce. It was just as the ability to buy things, do things, services were appearing purely online. And it was probably one of the modules or the courses within that really sort of inspired me and grabbed my interest. I didn't necessarily sort of come out of that thinking, right, I want to go into tech. I'm not technical, as in I can't code. I've never been able to code. I've never, at one level, I've never had a desire to start to learn to code. What I've found particularly interesting is the innovation side of technology and what it can enable you to do and how it can change things. I just sort of realized quite early that the best way to do that is to surround yourself by the people that can do the things you can't.
Yes.
So, never being able to code, well, I could start learning, or I could surround myself with people who are really good at coding.
Brilliant.
And so on, and picking coding as one sort of technical discipline. But it taught me to focus on the things that I could do that other people can't, but find the people that can do the things you can't. And so, never sort of lent into the technical side of technology, if that makes sense. It's been much more sort of big picture thinking and trying to work out, well, what can it bring, what can it change, what can it improve for you.
But makes absolute sense. I mean, it's the sort of enabling side, isn't it? And I always believe in, because we had a tech business, and I always believed if you could visualize it or imagine it, it could be done. It was the imagination that was the limiting factor typically, because there was always great people around there that could having had the idea, could make it happen. Whereas their challenge was probably more creating the idea in the first place. So when you combine different skill sets, that's the definition of a great team, is different skill sets, different talents coming together.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's interesting. Our founder, Brad Sugars, who's been a very successful entrepreneur over a long period of time, and at one point was doing a lot of buying and building of businesses. I remember he said one of the learnings he had was not to buy a business where he had any chance of actually being able to do the work, so that he was never sucked into the doing of the work. His job was to grow the business, and so that resonates quite a lot. So it's really interesting. But it actually is quite a unique's a very overused word, but it's quite unique or different to be a tech director that's not come from that background. That's really interesting. I mean, do you know many other people in that similar position?
So it's only recently that I guess we've renamed my role really to be tech director. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is we didn't have one, and we were sort of thinking, do we need one?
Yeah.
And obviously, it's as a consultancy really. So most of our work is outwardly facing. Tech director role, in my mind, is much more about almost like business development, or an element of business development, and an element of owning the proposition. So determining and deciding what we do as a business, not necessarily how we do it. I work with the tech teams and the senior tech people and our operations leaders, etc. So it's much less about sort of determining a technical strategy to say we're going to use this system or that system, but being able to talk well enough or competently enough about certain technical trends, or how to get the most out of technology, with sort of other leaders or senior people in our clients, and then bringing the right team of people behind me. So obviously, given our history, we've never had a tech director before. It sort of made sense that we probably need one to start leaning into the technical side of our proposition. And so, in many ways, I'm a sort of product owner, product director, or proposition director, and a business development director as much as anything.
Yeah.
And in some ways, and I can hear my other directors laughing, it's sort of that I was the least, I was the most technical out of a not very technical bunch. I was like the least worst option. But I think back to your point, it's sort of, I guess what I've learned a bit is I took some advice from other CTOs that I know, and they are a mix of really, really technical CTOs.
Yep.
You know, they've grown up as a coder and developed,
Yep.
you know, done the sort of software development, moved into architecture, etc. And people more like me. And actually asked that community of contacts I have here. So if I said I'm the tech director, what would you say?
Yeah.
And the mix of responses was quite interesting. You know, through to ones that I know very well laughed in my face, but mostly to wind me up, I think. But it was interesting, sort of an acceptance that you don't have to be, a general acceptance, you don't have to be technical to be the technical leader. You know, I think part of my job is getting the best out of the technical team. And that's not telling them how to go and code Python better, because I'm never going to do that. Or you've engineered that wrong in Azure, because I'm never going to do that. It's more so helping them grow as leaders, helping them understand how they've got to lead their team in a client, or work with a client, or get the most out of the client as much as your own team. And then leaning into the commercialities of our proposition. So it's all well and good, you want to build this thing because it looks cool, or it's the latest tech, but what value does that bring to our client? And one of the things we've been driving quite hard for is to, I think in this age, certainly in the data space, the technology is changing and moving all the time. We talk to a lot of our clients about just how confusing it is. You know, because once you've decided to do one thing, you sort of just about implemented it, and the next thing's come along, you're like, well, now what do I do? So one of our big challenges has been always to not try to over-engineer the solution. And it's almost what's the least we can get away with to solve the problem to get the client started. And for many technical, like brilliant technical people, that's almost a backward step, because they want to show off their technical skills. It's like, well, that's not that exciting, that's not that challenging. But I do think there is again, one thing I learned back in Syntegra, there's like a technical expertise in simplicity. And actually, if you can make this solution as simple and straightforward and as only what I need it to do, there's a real skill in that. And one of the things we've been trying to do, and I'm trying to develop a bit, is our approach to simplicity, if you like. So it's really easy to overcomplicate things. It's really easy to sort of hold on to the complexity, because that helps make you seem like the smartest person in the room, right? That's all well and good, but if you can simplify that to a point that anybody can get it, and it's really easy to implement, and it gets you value quickly, that's even more impressive.
Brilliant. And I think bang on, it's that connection between the real sort of, did you say, the doing of the technical work with the developing of the ideas and connecting the client to the solution, I guess, is so key. So looking back over your career and the business itself, what would you say some of the biggest issues you've had to overcome?
There's a mix. I was thinking about this question in terms of preparing. It's like that could be a session in itself. I think so. Just on that simplicity one, so some of that has been where I've learned the most. You know, where I remember a number of years ago when I was in Syntegra, sat in a rather large BT office in Edinburgh at midnight on my own. So it's just in the days that the sort of motion sensor lights appeared. So every 5 minutes I had to get up and wave my arms around to light the office back up. And I don't know whether you remember, but some of the original HP mobile devices, they were like as big as your hand. And we were having to build those from scratch. So not build them as in physically put the devices together, but put all the security applications on, put all the mobile apps on, configure them all. And there's only 50, but when you're on your own and you've been shown once how to do it, the amount of mistakes you make and have to go back and like do factory reset and stuff. And that was a long night. But again, learning through doing it 50 times and probably more like 100, because you had to redo a few of them. Being able to see we've massively complicated this. If we did it this way and we did it that way, and that was only a device with 4 apps, and then configure it to the individual. I came out with there's a better way to do this. So if we do it again, and wrote down the simplified process. So it was learning that and the need to test that before you sort of go, both feet in.
Yeah.
And that was both the beauty and the downside of that sort of entrepreneurial spirit. It was sort of, there's 50 devices, off we go, and it was 0 to 100. And watching sort of good technical people I work with now, they do that testing as they go much more rapidly. So whilst I like the sort of theory of the sort of learn fast, fail fast, doing that within some tramlines to sort of protect yourself or the client is quite important.
Yeah.
So learning some of that, and I think one of my biggest challenges has always been, I think, working out where I fit in all of that, because I'm not technical, but I really like how you can use technology to solve problems and improve things. My head goes to a place of like, I want to understand, but then it's also that I get really frustrated because I don't understand. I've not done it. I can't lean back on a foundational learning of coding or database design to be able to go, I can sort of understand it. And that's both really frustrating, but also I think probably in the last few years worked out as quite liberating. I don't have to figure it out. And my technical team will hate me for saying this, but I can come up with whatever idea I want.
Yep.
in a way, it's like, well, help me figure it out, and you get the rolling eyes of, oh, what's he come up with now? But it gets that balance of, okay, well, I have the freedom to come up with whatever I want because I don't understand how it works. I need you to help me probably pull me back and help figure out what's the realistic option. I think there is also, and these are things I could probably only sort of say now because you learn them quite a long time in the future.
Yep.
Having to walk away from my own business after that running for 3 or 4 years was at the time one of the biggest feelings of failure.
Yeah.
That I couldn't make it work. I couldn't get it off the ground. I couldn't get it past sort of 3 of us. And that took me a really, really, really long time to feel like that wasn't a failure. And it's only now, another 10 years later maybe, that I've been able to look back and actually reflect on quite a few of the reasons I'm where I am now, and I think like I do is because of that. Really easy to say, and there's a reason why they say hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I think, if I could go back in time and go, just ride it out. I've been very fortunate with my career and learned a lot. Excuse me. But mostly being able to ride those things out and recognize that everything is a learning step. It's sometimes realizing where that learning step is going to take you, which you don't realize until you've already done it.
Absolutely. No, I totally get that. If it helps at all, I know our founder, a guy called Brad Chiggett, he told me a long time ago that he's as successful as he is because he's made more mistakes than anybody else he knows. Not despite, but because. And it's that it is that sort of ultimate acceptance that not everything will go right, but if I don't try stuff, then I'll always stay in the same place. And as you said, it can be a hard lesson to learn, but it is a very liberating lesson once we've learned it.
Yeah, it's I think these days, again, sort of a bit of maturity, a bit more grown up. Actually, also, I'm probably surrounded by a very different, a very inspiring group of people. The director group at Oakland, we're very, very good at quickly recognizing that didn't quite work, or that went wrong. Right, what do we do about it? And rather than going, oh, it didn't go, we're right, and we're all sort of down. It's learn from it and move on. And I think again, one of the big learnings I had was actually I probably did that first business project with the wrong people. Nothing against individuals, but it was probably wrong timing, wrong people. I think surrounding yourself or doing it with other people is often a much better way, just so you feel like you've got other people to bounce off. There's an element of not quite protection, but you can feel more protected if you've got other good people around you. And I think I'm very fortunate that the director group at Oakland is very much there for each other.
Yeah.
Very supportive of each other and willing to sometimes help take a step back and go, okay, well, what can we do better? What can we learn? How do we improve? And again, it's probably only to the last few years, just realizing how important, how valuable that is to have that, you know, at that level and below, to be fair, around you, you know, as the business has grown in the last couple of years. So we've pretty much doubled in size in the last year. The year before that, probably the same. I think our our MD at the latest sort of all hands day, we had one last week. I think the last 3 years, 54% compound growth, and you know, we were sat in a room with the team, which is just shy of 50 permanent heads in front of us, and we're like, you know, they're all on those round tables like a cabaret style, and we were sat there going, I remember when we just filled one of those tables, and we're filling a room full of them. But you're surrounded by the directors that sort of, there's a genuine, we're in it together. But also now we're developing the next layer of leadership and senior people in the business that can take on more responsibility on our behalf, and feeling that we're there in it with you, and can learn with you, and again, sort of leaning into the, if it goes wrong, it's not the end of the world, but how do we learn from it? And you know, things will go wrong. It's how you make sure you don't do it again.
100%. Now, it's funny you say that. I remember, so we grew our business up to, well, we were over 100 people plus contractors, 12 million turnover. And the first Christmas dinner we had was 4 of us round a table in a pub. And the last one, we couldn't find anywhere big enough in North Yorkshire to take us and all the partners of all the people. And it was just, I remember that getting to that point of going, bloody hell, when you look backwards, it's a stunning thing. So obviously you've had a lot of different experiences. What would you say the biggest learnings you've had out of all of those, you know, all the things that you've done?
I again, it's a bit of a cliche. I think I'm still learning sort of believe in yourself. And I think a lot of people, this is where they need most help. It's sort of realizing where your value lies.
Yeah.
And you know, what you bring to the party, so to speak. And I'm still learning that, but you know, we talk of, there's often a lot of talk about imposter syndrome, isn't there? And it's sort of, everybody has a role to play, and then can lean into those strengths or those skills. One of the really good things that actually Oakland's made me do when I first joined was carry out a you know, the sort of typical personality tests type of thing that a lot of, especially in consulting, a lot of recruitment processes utilize. The one they picked was very much about your strengths. So it didn't sort of look at too much of the balance of strengths to weaknesses. Their theory was that when people look at strengths and weaknesses, they put all their effort into trying to resolve the weaknesses, and don't focus on what makes you special or what makes you unique. So it was the first time looking at that results and sort of showing where you can excel by focusing on your strengths with quite a different perspective. I'm still learning how to do that. You know, my belief in those strengths wavers from day to day. I think, like a lot of people, especially when you're in those leadership sort of positions, but recognizing that, and I think it comes back to what I said before, rather than necessarily trying to fill those gaps or those weaknesses yourself, build a team around you that can do that. And one of the things the directors have been doing of late in our business is looking at that across us as a leadership community. So we all have different roles to play, and our MD's been great at going, well, rather than just trying to balance each other out, why don't we just lean into what our strengths are and play us in the right position? And that might mean 2 of us have to do the same thing, but it doesn't really matter, because that means we've doubled up and we're even better in that position. We just need to got a bigger gap to fill somewhere else. But rather than constantly trying to go, well, you're not so good at that, but you're the least worst option, you know, let's either fill it by recruiting or fill it by somebody from the next sort of level of senior leadership down, or whatever it might be. But it's been a real push, and I think it's quite empowering to think of things that way around, rather than going, right, I've got a set of objectives which typically focuses on, I've got to close that weakness or get better at that, or whatever. I think that's one of the best things I've sort of learned really is try as quickly as you can to find your strength and lean into it 110%.
Yeah, it absolutely when it makes total sense. We do a lot of work on that with people we work with. There's a guy called Brian Tracy who talked about the concept of if everyone in an organization spent most of their time doing the 3 things they really love and they're really good at, then everyone's happier, which means they're more effective and efficient. The business is more successful and more profitable. And it just makes sense. It's like, why would you want to spend time doing stuff you're not very good at and you don't really like? It's just nuts. It's that stoic nature, isn't it? I think that sometimes as Brits
and I think it's interesting because I think there are times, especially in consultancy and tech consultancy, there's always bits that you're not going to enjoy. What we've been learning, I think a lot through lockdown as well, because it's given people more choice and more freedom, and also helping question why I do what I do. Again, I think one of the things that Oakland has done quite well, and again, we're still improving, is if you do find yourself in a situation where you're doing something you don't enjoy or you find particularly hard, I personally think our teams are very good at circling around that individual and going, right, how do we help? Because again, we found out the hard way, typically if you don't do that, that will lead to them burning out. It leads to them becoming overly stressed unnecessarily. You know, we're really, really fortunate as a business that our people that we recruit are hugely passionate about what they do. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So although they're from various disciplines of tech and data, they consider themselves problem solvers. So one of our guys told me quite interestingly a couple of years ago. He said, the trouble is you've employed us as problem solvers. So when you put us against a problem that can't be solved, we want to solve it, and we will keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And he said, the trouble, no matter how much you say stop doing it, take the weekend off, slow down, that's not going to make us stop. That's not going to help us. It's like we need to think of different ways to support that. So how can we put a team around them? How can we help them step back a bit? How can we take other things away from them so they can focus on solving that problem? And I think it is that mindset of support, because again, we are really fortunate that the people we have will go out of their way to solve a problem, especially like the more complex it is, the more interested they're into it, which is sort of obvious. But what that does is, I guess, bleed into how they work with a client, and our clients notice it in terms of the support they get. And you know, they don't get a team of 20 rocking up and just doing the job. They get a team of 5, and those 5 are like invested in making it better. So it's the support network that we are constantly trying to get right and better to sort of make sure people don't, I guess, fall into that trap a bit.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely perfect sense. So you're probably where we're a coaching organisation. I wondered who would be the best coach you've ever worked with, whether that's business or sport or life, and what would make them so?
So I've been searching a long time for a coach. In terms of, I've tried a few different ones, and interestingly, at the moment we're building that capability for our tech leaders. So not people like me, people who can actually do the technology, and are techies at heart. I think two people sort of stand out, I guess. So way back when I was a national level athlete and had a coach, and then a bit similar to, again, it's funny how when you look back at things, you sort of realize that some of these threads that then are in your mind have been there for years, you've never really realized. So as a 400-meter runner, anybody who's like raced to 400 or even tried to run a 400, you realize that you go as fast as you can for as long as you can, and then usually the winner is the one who dies last, basically. So it usually starts at about 150 meters from the finish line. You see people start slowing down very quickly. And at sort of 16, 17, my coach was very good at getting me to focus on the bits that I was really good at, rather than putting loads of effort into fill the weaknesses or the gaps. So it was sort of at that age where most kids my age started going to the gym. They'd come back from winter training and they'd sort of turned into a much bigger version of themselves than when we last raced in the summer.
Yes.
And he was very anti that, as in, we will get as far as we get with the skills you have today before we start then supplementing that with strength training or whatever. And I think, going back to what I just said, it's a learning from life of, until you've got the right support and the right person pushing you in the right direction, you can get quite far with the things you've already got and the skills you've already got. And then look to supplement, and then look, whether that is through, in sports or through different types of training, or whether that is in business by learning a new skill or surrounding yourself with the people that have the skills that you don't.
Yep.
And it was only until recently that I realised that whole thinking was there from a really early age.
Yeah.
He was very good at pushing me in the right way, to the point of not so I got despondent or down by it, but challenged enough to go, you can see progress. And I think, again, that's the other thing I've sort of learned with my fellow directors at Oakland, is having people around you that allow you to take the step back. You, especially running a business, I think if you look at the day-to-day graph, I use the graph loosely, but it's constantly doing this.
Yeah.
You're constantly making decisions under pressure at speed, with not always the right information. There's usually emotion involved, and that feels like a heart rate monitor going like Billy-O. If you take a step back and look at that in a week, and in the month, and then in a year, generally, if things are going well, that graph is doing that. But the further back you get, the flatter and straighter the line looks, and it generally trends up. And that can make you feel quite good about yourself. And again, similarly to doing athletics as a kid, you're always seeking that next personal best, or trying to get the next 2 seconds off the time. But that's because of what you did last week. If I look at what I did a year ago, it's 20 seconds faster than I did a year ago. So it's always having somebody that can help you show progress. And that coach back then was really good. It's less a coach, but it's more a great piece of advice that, again, one of our fellow directors taught me when I first joined Oakland, was to, when you start working with a client, it is to find that sort of personal bit of information that you're comfortable giving to the client to build a relationship. So he always said, find the thing that you can give to the client. And at the time I thought, well, like a bottle of wine or a bottle of whiskey. I thought those things were frowned upon these days. He's like, no, a bit of yourself to give to the client that actually helps build that trust. It helps build that sort of feeling of we're in it together. And it helps them invest in you as much as anything. Now, there's a timing to that. There's what bit of information do you pick, etc. But I watched him do it, and he still has relationships with his clients that he worked with sort of 15 years ago, and not sort of super personal, but enough that he could pick up the phone to them 10 years later. And it was a really interesting piece of advice, because as a consultant, you're always taught to try and get close to their problems. You're never taught to think about yourself and how you give that across to the client. And he's almost mentored by some of his clients these days because of that, and they have quite an open, honest relationship. But I thought that was a great bit of advice, especially for sort of younger people coming into the industry, to go, you do need to accept, and this is where the non-technical side of the technical consultancy comes across, is building that relationship is just as important as building the technical thing you've got to build.
Yes.
Some people are really good at it. Some people are much less good at it, should we say.
Yes. No, it makes absolute sense. I think, it sort of fits in that idea of being authentic, but, be the person you are rather than the person that you might think other people want to be. And I think, a little bit of fallibility sort of puts into contrast the strength. It's like, I'm
very true.
I'm not very good. It doesn't have to be a negative thing you share, but it is, this is my perhaps weaknesses, but that just makes my strengths even better, sort of thing. And
really good point. I do think there is a level of humility that a lot of people forget.
Yes.
And believe, especially in sort of in consultancy, it's probably a very broad area, but believe you have to go in as the expert and be the smartest person in the room. And it's like, well, not really. Well, I certainly don't believe that. I think it's always about building relationships.
Yeah.
And making the end client believe you can help them.
Yeah.
And that might be me on my own. It might be because I've brought in a team of people that can do that, or whatever. Or it might be actually sometimes going, yeah, we can't help you, but I know a person who can.
Definitely.
And I think it's always about that building that relationship. And I think for me, if you can do that and build that trust, and also show to our team that, you know, I'm not there trying to be something I'm not. I think it fosters the right environment for our team to thrive, but also for the client to thrive. And if you can stitch those two things together, that's where I've certainly seen the best results. If you go in, like you say, trying to be something you're not, you know, clients aren't stupid. They're going to see through it pretty quick, and then you're on the back foot straight away.
Absolutely, because if you're not as good as you were pretending to be in that area, what else are you? You know, and it's but it is a challenge in sort of a consultancy world, because primarily we are there to deliver knowledge and capability, and therefore but it's not that, you know, that isn't our identity, that's our capability, and therefore it's just saying, look, you know, there may be areas here that I'm not as strong as, and if there isn't, we'll either within the organization or externally we'll find those areas. It's why I'm a coach, not a consultant, to be honest, because it just coaching for me, just asking great questions rather than having to know the answers. It does help a lot. Yes. I'm not clever enough to have too many answers, so but I can ask them questions which works really well. And you sort of talked about things that you said, and sort of, I'd love to collect any favourite quotes or sayings. I don't know if there's anything that you fall back on in difficult or
no, I haven't actually. I was thinking that there's not there's not sort of go-to quotes that I sort of reel out necessarily. I've learned quite, not the hard way. I've learned through lots of trying, I guess. It's probably the best description. I've sort of tried to avoid too much of the trying to apply quotes or rules or things. I have realized that every person I deal with has got to be dealt with differently.
Yes.
And treat every individual as an individual, whether that's line managing them, whether it's selling to them, whether it's as a peer, you know, as a subordinate. So I've tried to avoid going, like, rocking up going, here's my sort of playbook of quotes and business ready things that I can use.
Yep.
That requires me to remember them, which is never a good start. But also, I think I would end up trying to use that in the wrong way rather than just talk to them as an individual and sort of, again, back to the strengths thing as opposed to the strengths and weaknesses. What is that individual's strengths? And that'll be different from the next individual. And it's then support them and build the environment in which they can develop those strengths and thrive with those strengths rather than worry about what they can't do.
That makes perfect sense. What would you say you've learned about yourself over your career?
I think just sort of going back to the bit of sort of being clear on what you don't know, surrounding yourself by the people that do know that, and not being afraid of that. I think it's always, again, back to sort of imposter syndrome. You're always trying to go, or if I don't know something, that's a weakness, that's a gap, that's something that somebody's going to find out. It's quite empowering. I think it's also back to humility. Sitting in front of, I've sat in front of some really senior clients going, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I know. I do know somebody in the team who knows, and you need to meet them. But I'm not going to sit there and try and give you the BS answer that sort of, I suspect I probably know just a little bit more than you, but not enough that you're going to completely believe me. And I'll say one thing that makes you question it, and then my credibility is lost. It's definitely that sort of, again, understanding what you're good at and believing. I think the other thing is things you don't even know you're good at. So one of the things that again, back to the sort of director team, trying to work out what we're good at and put place in the right roles. I think one of the things I've learned I'm quite good at is how did the MD say it? Is that it's stitching ideas together and seeing the sort of linkages and things that other people don't. So I'm sort of better at strategy than the sort of the detail of how I get there.
Yeah.
If you like.
Yeah.
So often if I'm with clients or with the team, I'm already thinking, well, how do I stitch that with that? And what does that mean? And how do I do that with that thing over there? And they're still trying to get into the detail. How do I solve the first problem? And I have to be careful sometimes that I'm like, well, you can't drag the team along with you because most of the people we have want to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And I've already moved on from that problem. And it's not only understanding your strength, it's understanding how to use your strength. So if I just wade into one of our delivery teams and start talking about the big picture strategy for 3 years' time, they're going to just tell me to jog on.
Absolutely.
It's like, that's not helping us because we're still trying to solve problem number one.
Yeah.
So it's learning sometimes when to come in, when to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Because you'll just put people off. That's been one of the harder things, I think, than learning or understanding the strength in itself.
Yeah.
It's knowing when to deploy it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that makes perfect sense. So just to sort of look into the future a little bit, what does the future look like for you guys, or what do you see as some of the main challenges you might face, if any?
So I think as a business, I think we're at that interesting inflection point where we're sort of big enough to now not be tiny, and it's how do we sort of build the next sort of phase of our growth. Yeah. Our biggest, I think, biggest bit of preparation for that as a director team has been laying the foundations for the next tier of leadership.
Great.
And when I say that, that's not just sort of heads of this and heads of that. It's everybody. So everybody, I think, has a role to play in some element of leadership in the business. And it's building those leadership skills. I think it's one of the areas that is not taught a lot through from university through to graduate programs through to whatever level of training. It's a massive gap. I think people are taught competence and skills in that respect, and they're not really taught leadership.
Yeah.
And for us, I think that's the biggest next step we've got to navigate.
Yeah.
There'll be different people that can play different roles in that leadership. There'll be people that think they can play a certain role in leadership and can't, and so on and so forth. And we're in sort of not pressing reset, but in sort of launching that next phase of our development. Is trying to do that in a way that genuinely makes and builds an environment for our people to thrive.
Great.
Back to your point, I think really that if people are in a place where they feel supported, they're doing things that they enjoy, they're doing things that challenge them, that translates into the work they do for their clients. The clients see that, and that delivers good outcomes. So we're putting an awful lot of emphasis and time into understanding what that environment needs to look like, and that's everything from the physical aspects. People are starting to come back to the office now. So what does that look like? I think that's really hard compared to 2 years ago when you go, I've got 30 people, I'll probably need 35 desks. We're going to grow by X, so I'll probably need 50 desks. It's like, well, people come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Monday and Friday are dead. So, what do we do? And actually, people come in for different reasons. So they don't want to come in and just sit on Teams all day. So I can do that from home. So I want more collaborative space. So there's some infrastructural type challenges I think we've got, but it's mostly how do we build the right framework, the right support structures to enable our people to thrive. For me personally, what I get the most satisfaction out of work is sort of walking in, seeing our team like really excited about the work that they're doing and enjoying it. And because enjoyment could be, that's a really bloody hard problem, and it's going to take weeks and months to solve. And they're excited by trying to solve that problem through to I've just built this thing and it works, and the client's really excited about it. But it's building that environment that people come to work and they genuinely enjoy what they do for us and with us, rather than people always sort of treat it as a job, but they can still enjoy their job. They can still come and be excited about it. And I think that's the biggest thing for us. Is making that bit work and making that bit sing. I think, you know, when people talk about I've made it, I genuinely think that's what I will feel like if you've got a team that's sort of self-sufficient, they've got the right environment to be the best version that they can be of themselves. That's where you can sort of not quite sit back, but go, it's working. We've got a lot to learn. We've got a long way to go, but we've got some really good people that are leaning into that challenge and understanding what we need to do to get better at that.
Yeah, brilliant. Interesting. I do see it quite a lot in fast growing businesses. If you've got different sort of levels of leadership and management, sort of performance analogy of almost like a train with sort of elasticated linkages, where often, and it's often at the top that sort of the leaders move forward because they have to. They've got to drive the business forward. They tend to leave the next level of leadership and management behind for a while and create a gap. And without some work to fill the gap, you know, we've always got that lagging. And then, but when they catch up, it's often below, you know, if there's another level, and it's trying to keep everything. And I think that's how businesses grow. I don't think it's like it can all work perfectly together. It's just accepted there will be those gaps over time. But it's the important thing is to look back and backfill them with that knowledge and expertise and communication that's so key.
I think that the other big challenge we've really got, given that we've always been quite a small business throughout those 38 years, and it's a bit of an emotive word, but it does often feel like it has a sort of family feel, rightly or wrongly, because that has different connotations to some people. I think what we're all really wary of and mindful of, especially the directors, is we've sort of got a plan we believe in. We're in a sector that is buoyant and sort of growing all the time. Growing is not the thing we're scared of. The thing we're scared of is making sure we grow into something we like. Or we get there and we've built something we don't like, to inverse it. So we care a lot about and sort of take a lot of pride in the thing we've got so far and what we've built so far. The easy thing to do would be to lean into growth at sort of all costs and go after it at 100 miles an hour. And sort of what you end up with is not something you set out to do. So a really poignant speech by the MD at this all hands team day was, the growing is not the thing I'm worried about. It's growing into something I don't like. And I think that's a much bigger challenge than growth in itself.
It's really interesting point. I meet a lot of people, Andy, that often say, and you're not exactly saying this, but forgive me, say, I'm really concerned if I grow, the culture will change.
Yes.
And the thing I say to successful businesses, great businesses grow because of their culture, not despite of it. So if you know, and the key thing for me, the leaders, if we're the governors and the empowerers of culture, that's what attracts great people, both employees and customers and suppliers. So it's like, if you've got a great culture, you know, focus on that, and everything looks after, you know, most other things look after itself. It doesn't need to change it. It's just that we see large businesses often have a poor culture, but they didn't that wasn't a function of growth, in my opinion. It's a function of a lack of focus on what made them great. Because there's a really cool book which sort of does what it says on the tin. It's a brilliant book to read in general, but a guy called Marshall Goldsmith who said, what got us here won't get us there. And it is about just understanding that we do need to focus on things that we probably didn't need to focus on before. We do. I mean, you were saying about your growth, and I have that analogy of, you know, the four people around the table. There gets to a point where between sort of 20 and 50, where you stop knowing the name of not just every employee, but all their, you know, their family, their dogs, and then you only know them. And then ultimately there's that point, unfortunately, where you go, who's that? I don't even know who that person is.
Absolutely.
And it's accept that doesn't mean that the culture has to change. It just means that we don't personally know everybody, because that's would ultimately be an impossibility. But it's the effort of putting in the extra layers that match the culture, that make sure people feel like they're known, that, you know, that they're, even though we may not know everything about them all the time.
And I think it's also, knowing the bits you want to protect. So
yes,
you know, in growing, you're right. I think that there's always going to be things you need to change to deal with that growth. So it might be a process, it might be a system that is now no longer fit for purpose.
yeah,
Those things will inevitably change as you grow. It's
yep.
I think we're spending quite a bit of time at the moment as a leadership community saying, well, we say that, you know, what we're going to grow into, that's what we're worried about. So what are the things that we want to protect? And there's more to protect than there is to change at the moment. Yep. So how do we protect those becomes the next question. Brilliant. And I think that's the bit we're now leaning into. You know, we recently introduced a new HR director that's sort of been there and seen some of it. I won't put her on the spot and say that she's been there, done it, and she's come with the answer on a on a table mat. But she is helping us sort of, again, fresh pair of eyes is always quite useful, but unpick and sort of go, well, culturally, when you say that, what do you mean? So what things are you trying to protect, and how is that demonstrated today? And is that likely to demonstrate itself in the same way in the future, or have we got to adapt to be able to demonstrate that differently? Because again, like you say, you can demonstrate certain things in a certain way when there's 20 of you. You demonstrate that quite differently when there's 50 or 60 of you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. 20 of you, you'd probably have a chat, you know, a company meeting, have a chat with everybody, because it's that you would, but you know, 50, 100, it's impossible. And there's a really cool book called, you may have read it, but it's called Start With Why, which really highlights the value of understanding our purpose and values and putting that at the core of everything we do. And I see consistently that successful businesses are the ones that do focus on, as you say, what our strengths are, and let's play to them rather than and what mustn't change, and keeping those at the core. Just 2 or 3 sort of questions to wrap up, Andy, is what would you say to anyone that was thinking of going to business right now?
Right now at this moment, I think it'd be sort of cautionary given the sort of economic climate. I think though, if you, I think well, back to what we've been saying, really understand what business you're going into and why. So if you can find something that leans on your strengths and takes advantage of those strengths, then go for it. I think my biggest learning from when I tried to do it the first time around is, and this is I think this is personal because I know people who have done it without this, but try to do it with other people that you trust, and can help you fill those gaps where your strengths don't touch or don't rely on. I would, so I'm very close with my other directors. You know, I call them mates, but I've not gone into business with mates, if that makes sense. I've always been a bit cautious of that personally. Because you know, one of our directors is always sort of with any relationship, whether it's a client contract or an employee, always think of the divorce first and make sure that's going to be as seamless as possible. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're going into business with a friend, be really cautious of that. If it, for whatever reason that is out of your control, it all goes wrong, you probably want to hold on to that friendship more than you do the business. So I think, if you're confident and understanding of the strength or the skill that you have to bring to market, I would lean into it. I think it's hugely liberating. It's scary, I'm not going to lie, and it has its ups and downs, but it can be hugely rewarding as well. And I've certainly found, I think when I first started it, I was thought it'd be rewarding because of what I can do. It's actually, I find these days it's more rewarding because of people I've brought in around me and watching them do what they can do. That's what's really quite cool about running a business, really. Brilliant.
And if you started again, is there anything that you do differently?
I think it's probably more that bit about the people you've got and the people you surround yourself by. At that time, I don't think they were wrong. I think just learning. I think that business we set out to try and be could have had more legs if it'd been slightly different people, or we'd waited a bit longer. And I think some of these things that we're talking about today, I was probably too young and immature really from a business sense to know what's my strength I'm bringing.
Yeah.
You know, people always talk about sort of build a business around the skill you have, and work out whether that's tradable, and then don't give it away for free.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew what that was back then.
Yes.
You know, I had a bit of an idea, and it was probably more working out, can I do all of that idea on my own to execute that idea? What other skills do I need? I think if you can work that out, or even start small and start with the thing that you can do on your own.
Yeah.
And just people are often keen to give stuff away to try and lead through get your foot in the door is the phrase. Again, I've learned the hard way. People don't value things if they get it for free. So always charge for it. Always make sure that your skill, your thing you bring to market is chargeable and you're getting paid for it.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, I totally agree. And finally, what would be the best advice you could give an 18-year-old you if you could go back in time and do so?
Probably keep up the athletics for a bit longer. So I went to university, and it was a choice of universities, so I could have gone to Loughborough and sort of carried on running, and the sort of academic side would have been a bit secondary to that. But it was at a time where, well, still these days, really, sort of athletes don't really make much of a living unless you're sort of top 3 in the world.
Yeah.
And then certainly no Usain Bolt. So I think it might have been a short-lived career. But I think the athletics and the training and that side of things did teach a level of discipline, focus, back to what I was saying, and again, understanding what you were good at, how to exploit those skills and the things you were good at, rather than trying to constantly close the gap or fix a weakness. I know, world of sport has moved on a bit since, and sort of things like Dave Brailsford into trying to find those marginal gains. But I think the marginal gains are true in business as well, and it's more about, for me, the marginal gains on the things you're good at than not. I think keeping on that would have, I think, helped reinforce those disciplines and push that along a bit longer, rather than jumping into uni and doing a course and then drinking too much beer.
Yes, I remember those times.
Indeed, yeah. Seems like a long time ago. Yeah,
indeed. Well, Andy, look, it's been absolutely really fascinating talking to you, and it's really interesting to see your philosophy on many things, and certainly aligned to most of them. And you obviously said you'd be doubling, pretty much doubling for the last 2 or 3 years. It'd be great to maybe come back in a year or so's time and see.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Where you guys are by then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.